Hey, welcome to the Daily Word Bible Study, a plain and simple book by book, chapter by chapter, and verse by verse study through the entire Bible. Currently, we are in Matthew chapter 7, and um, actually, we're kind of closing down. We're coming to the close of the Sermon on the Mount, and but Jesus is still going to is giving some very powerful to me, powerful words, not only of wisdom, but of course, this is his criteria for being his disciples. And to me, he's bringing it hard. Okay, so think that if you think that he is soft on Christianity, anything like that, he's not. But let's get into it, because really, it's a lot to cover. So Matthew chapter 7, and let's take a look here. All right, so verse 7, he says, keep asking and it will be given to you. Keep searching and you will find. Keep knocking and the door will be open to you. For everyone who asks receives, the one who searches finds, and to the one who knocks, the door will be open. What man among you, if his son asks him for bread, will he give him a stone? Or if he asks for a fish, will he give him a snake? If you then who are evil know how to give good gifts to your children, how much more will your Father in heaven give good gifts to those who ask him? Therefore, whatever you want others to do for you, do also the same for them. This is the law and the prophets. Now, Jesus says a lot here, right? He says a lot, and which we need to unpack. But the first thing is that I think we should say to me what he's not saying. So in the first verses 7, when he says, keep asking and it will be given to you, keep searching and you will find, keep knocking and the door will be open to you. Now, this is not to me to say that we have to do this to God. Now, so in other words, it's a generic statement in terms of just, let's say, life. If you keep asking, it will be given to you. Keep searching, you will find. Keep knocking, and the door will be open to you. Right. So that's just kind of, in a sense, a generic statement. And then he says, for everyone who asks, receives. The one who searches, finds. And to the one who knocks, the door will be open. So, again, this is not how God operates. It's not what Jesus is saying how God operates. He's going to sit there and just say, just keep on asking, keep on asking, keep on asking, keep on asking, keep on asking. Excuse me, or keep on knocking, keep on knocking. But the idea is that, too, there is this persistence in terms of, again, life. Now, you'd be surprised how many times people give up, right? And give up their pursuit, give up whatever. And Jesus is saying, don't. So then in verse 10, he says, he said, what man among you, if his son asks him for bread, will he give him a stone? Or if he asks for fish, will he give him a snake? So the question is, if your children, and this is a comparison. So to me, this is why we see the shift of thought here, that what he is not saying that you have to beg God or you have to keep asking. And I think part of why he is saying this is because of the sinful nature in which we live. So then he goes on and he says, so if you, he says, what man among you, if his son asks him for bread, will he give him a stone? Now, if you ask God for good, the question is, will God give you evil? Or will he give you something bad? That's why he says, so if your son asks you for bread, will you give him a stone? Now, of course, this is generic because in reality, there are some sick, twisted parents out there who would. But I think we could agree, Jesus is being generic right here. So verse 11 says, if ye then who are evil know how to give good gifts to your children, how much more will your Father give you good things to those who ask him? And then he goes back and he says this. So in other words, God will give you good things. Now, this is a generic statement. So this is not something that you should say, well, God now is going to give me whatever I ask. Because that's not going to happen. And I'll give you a good example. James and John's, the apostle James and John's mother asked Jesus that in his kingdom to set her boys, one on the right hand and the other one on the left. And Jesus is like, yeah, not going to happen. Okay. He said, not going to happen. And of course, I'm paraphrasing that. Now, verse 12, he says, therefore, whatever you want others to do for you, do also the same for them, for this is the law and the prophets. A couple of things about this. This have come to be known as the golden rule. Now, if I cite it from the King James, because I think most people probably know it from the King James, do unto others as you would have them do unto you. Okay? So, he says, therefore, whatever you want others to do for you, do also the same for them. Now, here's the idea here. And I think what he's not saying is that every time you want someone to do something for you, that is going to happen. That what Jesus is actually saying here is you treat people how you would want them to treat you. So the issue is not whether or not if they treat you that way. So remember, he's talking to people. This is how you ought to be. That you treat people how you would want them to treat you. So that's the golden rule. And notice he said, and then this is the law and the prophets. This is the law and the prophets. Okay, this is the law and the prophets. Now, when you go back to the the law of Moses. When you go back to the law of Moses, and by the way, when he says the law and the prophets right here, he talks about this really comprises the entire Old Testament. Now, the reality, of course, you could break down the Old Testament as we have it, as we have the collection of writings into 3 sections. But in reality, Jesus refers to just 2, the law and then the prophets, the writings of the prophets. In our Bible, that would be the writing of the prophets, the literary books, and then historical books. But notice what he says, that what the essence of the law and the prophet is just that, doing unto others as you would have them to do unto you. And that's the whole point. Do unto others as you would have them to do unto you. And if you go back to the commandments, that's really how the commandments are laid out. In other words, if you even just look at the 10 commandments, you have basically 2 principles of the 10 commandments. One, to love God, right? To love God with all of your heart. And then the other is to love your neighbor as yourself. Now, religious people, well, oftentimes, this is what they miss the most, because religious people will focus on the commandments. the traditions, and not the essence, the spirit of the law. That's why he says, therefore, whatever you want others to do for you, do also the same for them. So if you are in a church and would you want somebody to speak nasty to you? Would you want somebody to be mean to you? You know, how would you want people to treat you? Now you go to the law, and it's kind of interesting because when you think about the law, now the if especially when it comes to, let's say, salvation, a lot of people think if I do good, one of the most, I think, biggest problems is, and again, this goes back to religion, because religion disregards the spirit of the law, the intent. What did God mean when he gave the commandments? So if you think about just now, if I'm going to keep the law, if I'm going to be made right, if I'm going to earn my way to heaven by doing the law, first of all, you have to keep the law perfectly all the time. So if you break one little command, just one, you would have broken the entire law. But here's a lot of times, what we don't also realize is that to break one of the least of the commands is sin. Now think about that it's sin. When you break one, it's sin. For example, there is a command in the law that says if you see your brother's ox, your neighbor's ox, that's lost. It could be a donkey or a mule, right? You're sitting up on your land and you're on your porch and you see that there is a donkey wandering, and obviously it got out, it's lost. Now the law says go and get the donkey or the ox and keep it safe until your neighbor comes looking for it, and then return it to him. So it didn't say keep it and then use it, maybe rebrand it or whatever, how they handle livestock. But keep it and then return it to your neighbor. So there's a couple of things. If you didn't keep that law, you would have broken the entire law. And I'm saying that because a lot of people do not consider, okay, they don't consider violating that kind of law as something serious. So in other words, if first, there's a couple of ways you can violate that command. One, you could see your brother's donkey or ox that's lost and just completely ignore it. Let it just go on and wander off. Maybe someone else would steal it or whatever. Or to just go on or whatever. Or you could steal it yourself. You can just grab it and then keep it for yourself. Either way, you would have violated God's law. And in doing so, you would have violated the entire law. But here's the thing. You would have committed sin. Right? So we don't think about that, right? We don't think about that as sin, those little things that God says don't do. I remember a person who was, they consider themselves what's called a holiness uh, saints. They go to a holiness church. And in the holiness church, the Pentecostal holiness church, they teach, well, you have to live right. You got to live holy in order to go to heaven. But yet, something like that. So let's say, for example, littering. If you're going to obey the law right here, you can't litter. You can't violate the law. So you can't be driving and roll your window down and throw out your bag of McDonald's. That would be violating the law. Thus, you would be sinning. Okay? Now, so then he says, so what's summed up in the law is, he says, therefore, whatever you would want others to do for you, do also the same. In our day, let's say, would you if you were driving down the street and you saw your brother or your sister on the bus stop, would you not give them a ride? Okay, so we could go on and on and on with that. If you were in the same category, would you not want someone to offer you a ride? Even, now I know and acknowledge on the other side of this, the other side would be we have to be careful. Sometimes you have to be careful. You have to be careful about being a gentleman these days. You seriously, you can get me too'd. Okay. All right. Verse 13 says, "Enter through the narrow gate. For the gate is wide and the road is broad that lead to destruction, and there are many who go through it. However, narrow is the gate and difficult the road that leads to life, and few find it." And this is kind of amazing because we hear this verse. I mean, I've heard this verse preached many, many times, right? Notice he says, "Enter through the narrow gate." Why? For the gate is wide and the road is broad that leads to destruction. And notice what he says right here. And many will go through it. And so is Jesus sort of telling us in a roundabout way that there will be more people lost than saved? And then he says, "How narrow is the gate and difficult the road that lead to life, and few that find it." Now, we're not going to, of course, get into the talking about salvation, excuse me, and what I mean, because that's something that you need to really unpack. Here's what I'm going to say here is what Jesus is not saying is that obtaining salvation itself is difficult. You know why it's not difficult? Because Jesus is the one that bore our sins. In fact, later on, we're going to see a verse when Jesus would say, "Come unto me, all of you who are heavy laden." You're heavy laden with burdens. He says, "Come unto me. My burden is light." See, my burden is light. And so I wish I could find that because I'm not quoting all of that verse. So the point here that Jesus is not saying that, man, it's going to be hard for you to earn your way to heaven. Difficult to get into heaven. And some people see this verse as saying that. Some people see this as that they think that salvation is difficult. Well, let me show you why it's not difficult right quick. Let me go to Colossians. This is one of my favorite verses. If you've been in any round of the teachings, you know I quote this verse frequently. And this is why. Look at verse 21. Verse 21 says, "Once you were alienated and hostile in your minds because of your evil actions. But now he has reconciled you by his physical body through death to present you holy, faultless, and blameless before him." I just want to focus again on verse 22 again. He reconciled you by his physical body through his death to present you holy, faultless, and blameless before him. So it's not difficult for me. So what may be the difficulty? Notice this: if you remain grounded and steadfast in the faith and not shift away from the hope of the gospel. What is difficult for people is choosing the right way. Jesus put it this way in John chapter 3, that men do not come to the light because they love the darkness. So that's why it's difficult. Sin could be very enticing. Like, think about it. You know, what pleasures we can be enticed to. Jesus tells the story of the young witch ruler that came to him running and knelt before Jesus and said, "Good master, what may I what can I do to have eternal life?" And Jesus said, "Well, keep the law." And the guy said, "Well, which ones?" And Jesus says, "Well, don't steal, don't bear false witness, don't commit adultery, don't murder, don't." And the guy said, "I've kept all these things from my youth." And then Jesus said, "Well, go sell all that you have, give to the poor, and come follow me." And so now you see the difficulty. It wasn't difficulty what Jesus said. He could have just, "Here's my riches," right? He didn't want to give up his riches. That's the difficulty. The difficulty is in choosing life over death, over your sin, over your sinfulness. That's what's difficult. All right, guys, don't forget to like and share this video and subscribe to the Bible, plain and simple. And as always, if you have a thought or comment, add it to the comment section below. All comments are welcome, and I'll see you in the next study.